Good morning, Pelham Road. If your day hadn't gotten off to a good start, I pray that it gets better from here on out. Want to recommend something today. Want to recommend a website called smarthistory.org. I go to smarthistory.org at least once a week. It's usually a enlightening tour around a museum of some sort, with the curator of the museum or some of the art experts or archaeologists, depending on the type of museum it is. And you just walk away, it's 30 minutes well spent. I mean, it's much better than playing solitaire or going to social media and checking things out there. Smarthistory.org. Christians at times can have a limited understanding of salvation. So limited that they make salvation simply about the afterlife. They think they know who has it and who doesn't, who's in, who's out. And they consider the work of church, to be largely about converting others to their version of the truth of salvation. It's hard for me to be hypercritical of this view, since at one time it was my own. But Christians are now seeing that there are multiple images and metaphors for salvation in the Scripture. It may be a surprise to hear that not a single reference to salvation in the Old Testament relates to the afterlife. In the New Testament, there are references to salvation as the afterlife. But in the Old Testament, one of the dominant ideas of salvation is liberation from bondage. In the Old Testament, this is Israel's story. Israel's liberation from the domination of the Egyptians and Babylonians too. In the New Testament, there's also liberation, and this is understood as primarily liberation from sin, liberation from the anti-life pull towards alienation and disintegration and addiction. Paul has a word for it. He calls it just the flesh. This image, as it is found in one of the gospel stories, is particularly illuminating. Just after Jesus predicts for the third time that he will suffer and he will die, James and John ask a curious question. They say, when Jesus comes into his kingdom, can we sit on the left hand and the right hand? Can we share ruling with you? And this continues the bitter dispute the disciples had been having over who was the greatest. And Jesus says these words to them. This is how the prominent people of the world function. They strive for places and positions of power in order to lord it over others. Not so with you now. If you want to participate in God's dream for the world, then you must become the servant of all. That's Mark 10:42-44. Then Jesus offers his own life as an example. He says, even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Now, the word translated ransom could also be translated redemption or liberation. Jesus' death is the culmination of the life he lived, but Jesus is speaking in an even more profound way. This text is saying that this self-giving, this sacrificial life of the Son of Man, or Jesus, becomes a mean of liberation for the disciples as they follow this way of life. The liberation here in this passage is from a life of grasping power and position, from the need to lord it over others. The disciples wanted to return to the old pecking order. Some people sitting beside Jesus, the rest sitting far away from Jesus. But Jesus wanted to liberate them from the pecking order altogether. Jesus wanted to ransom or redeem them from the whole game of competing and comparing themselves to others, so that they could be free to be servants of all, without regard or distinction for social status, without bias, without prejudice, without favoritism towards any, just serving. This, of course, is not even the whole story. It's just one of the New Testament images for salvation. There are plenty. Some Christians like to think of salvation only in terms of the afterlife, because then they don't have to struggle with the need to die to the ego-driven self and become a humble servant of God, which is what Jesus really would like. It's much easier and more convenient to make salvation about going to heaven. One hardly has to change at all, except just believe the right things and obey the right Christian rituals. But healthy Christianity is about much more than just the afterlife. It involves personal and communal and social transformation. It's about liberation from our egos and from greed and from selfish ambition and other sins which so easily distract us. It's about reflecting the image of God in our relationships and embodying this love and compassion of Christ in all the things that we do. The first order of business is to reconsider a moment in time salvation. To reconsider that and to consider salvation as an ongoing transformation. Does someone get saved in a moment when they pray a prayer? Well, yes. But the transformation is short-circuited quickly if it is not an ongoing, living, breathing relationship with the divine that brings transformation. And for this reason, it may help for us to consider salvation as ongoing transformation instead of just simply one prayer. If it aids you in understanding the journey of faith, then by all means, consider that moment when you came to your senses and recognized your need for God as a necessary first step. But please, that cannot become our last step, or certainly our only step. It is this transformation away from self to serve others that we need to begin to consider and renew our lives with. Have a good day.